by Carmen, who is the Senior Financial Program Specialist in Community Affairs at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who will be moderating our Q&A later in today's webinar. And also later in the program, we'll be joined by Lisa Schipperle, the Senior Policy Analyst in the Office of Older Americans at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who will offer her expertise in recognizing and preventing scams during our Q&A. And also off camera, we have Roxana Barrias, the Outreach and Engagement Analyst at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who is hugely helpful in putting together today's event. So before we get started, let me give you a quick overview of our settings in Zoom. As mentioned, this is a Zoom webinar, and therefore you are joining on listen-only mode. You can switch your audio between your computer and your phone at any time under audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. We have enabled the chat box, so feel free to use that box to connect with other participants or send messages to the speakers and co-facilitators. Keep an eye on the chat for messages from Switchboard and links to various resources that we'll be mentioning throughout. You can also type your questions in the Q&A box, and we will address those during Q&A time. You can also thumbs up or vote for questions that you think are particularly relevant during today's session. And lastly, I would like to mention that today's session will run for 1 hour and 30 minutes, and that it is being recorded. You will receive an email with the recording, the slides, and recommended resources within 24 hours. The webinar script, along with the recording, will also be posted on Switchboard's website within the following days. We have 3 learning objectives for today's webinar. Firstly, this webinar will work to describe how the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau protects consumers and how service providers should report concerns. Secondly, this webinar seeks to empower newcomers with the knowledge needed to safely open bank accounts, access credit, purchase cars, and transfer money. And finally, this webinar seeks to identify scams and predatory practices that most often affect immigrants, refugees, and other newcomers. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you to our colleagues at Switchboard and to everyone who has joined us today for this really important webinar. I'm Sonia Lin, a Senior Engagement and Policy Fellow at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Before we get started, I want to make sure to share an important disclaimer that we must go through. This is a presentation that's being made by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by representatives of the Bureau on behalf of the agency. It does not constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of the CFPB, and any opinions or views stated by presenters here are the presenters' own and may not represent the Bureau's views. This presentation also includes links and references to third-party resources not from the CFPB. This doesn't necessarily reflect the Bureau's endorsement of these third parties or the views expressed on the third-party site or products or services offered on the third-party site. So the Bureau hasn't vetted these third parties, their content, or any products or services, and there may be other possible entities or resources that are not listed that may also serve your needs. So having gotten through that disclaimer, let's go ahead and get a sense of who's in the room with us today. So I want to invite everybody to answer this poll question. It's a pretty simple question to help us figure out, who has joined us today. The question is, are you familiar with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? So please select the answer that best fits you. Yes, you are familiar. No, not familiar. Somewhat, or unsure, not really sure who you guys are. Please, we'll take a second just to see where folks are at. Okay, so there's a range. It looks like actually a lot of people, maybe the majority, 54% are not familiar with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. A small portion, 13% are, and another 30% somewhat, and 2% unsure. So that is super helpful. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. And now we want to go ahead and really introduce the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to participants in this webinar. So we will go into section 1 of today's webinar to talk a little bit about who we are. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We are a 21st century agency that implements and enforces federal consumer financial law and ensures that markets for consumer financial products are fair, transparent, and competitive. What does this mean? It means that the CFPB is a government agency dedicated to making sure that consumers are treated fairly by banks, by lenders, and other financial institutions. When we talk about consumer financial products, what are we talking about? We're talking about everything from bank accounts to prepaid cards, credit cards, mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit reports, products and services that people use to manage their money and that your clients encounter in many different ways. Next slide, please. So how do we do this work? The CFPB's core functions are the following. 1, we identify and stop practices that harm consumers. 2, we enforce consumer financial laws. We have an enforcement division with lawyers and investigators and paralegals who take entities to court or investigate entities for violations of the law. 3, we take consumer complaints and we seek responses from service providers about those complaints. 4, we provide reliable financial education and information. 5, we research the consumer experience of using financial products to have better understanding of these experiences. And 6, we monitor financial markets to identify existing and new risks to consumers. Next slide. So one important function that we want to highlight for everybody today about what the CFPB does is our taking of consumer complaints. This is a really important function of the agency and a resource that may be useful to you and to your clients. We have a complaint system. So consumers who have a problem or an issue with a financial institution can actually file a complaint with the CFPB. What we do is we work to get a response to that complaint from the entity. If the complaint is about an issue that's not within our jurisdiction and another agency would be better to assist, we will send it to that agency and let the consumer know. But if it's about a financial product or a service that's within the scope of our work, we will forward those complaints to the financial entity in question. And on average, we send more than 10,000 complaints about financial products or services to companies for a response each week. Companies are required to respond within 15 days, and most companies do so. So this is an important avenue for helping consumers get information and help about problems that they're having with different financial products. Not only is it an important avenue for help, it's also a way for the CFPB and others to identify companies and practices that may be violating the law. So this next slide here illustrates a little bit more about how the complaint process works. A consumer submits a complaint. We at the CFPB review and route that complaint as appropriate, either to the appropriate entity, or if it pertains to a different federal agency or law enforcement partner, will send it to that agency. The company provides a response. Communicates with the consumer as needed. Generally, they do respond within 15 days. Sometimes that response is, we need some more time, but they have overall 60 days to provide feedback about the complaint. And then 4, we publish information about the complaint in our public consumer complaint database. with the consent of the consumer, we will publish your description of what happened after taking steps to remove personal information. But this is an important tool so that the public can know about potential actions and problems that consumers are facing with different financial services and products. And then we let people know when the company responds. You'll be able to review a company's response, and you can provide feedback about whether the response is adequate or not. So how do you submit a complaint to the Bureau? The slide here provides the URL for submitting a complaint. Submitting online is generally the sort of most streamlined way for consumers to submit a complaint. It takes usually less than 10 minutes. If a consumer can't submit a complaint online for any reason, they can use the phone to submit a complaint. This may take a little bit longer, usually about 25 or 30 minutes. But one thing that's important to note for consumers who are more comfortable submitting a complaint in a language other than English, interpretation is available by phone. Up to, or I think around 180 languages are available as far as interpretation services. And so this is a good option for those with limited English proficiency. Consumers can submit complaints about any range of financial services and products, again, from credit cards to bank accounts to vehicle loans, payday loans, debt collection, money transfers, remittances, credit reporting, other financial services. And every complaint that we receive gives us insight into problems that people are experiencing in the marketplace. It helps us as an agency identify and prioritize problems for potential action. And of course, it's an avenue to support consumers in getting more information and hopefully resolving whatever issue or problem they're having with a financial product. So again, we really wanted to make sure that participants during today's webinar are aware of this resource before diving in more to other resources and tools that we have here at the CFPB. All right. Next slide. So now we're going to turn to part 2 of our presentation, which is on multilingual resources for newcomers. And again, we'll start this part of the webinar with a little bit of an interactive activity. So please get ready. The question here is, what are the top 3 languages that the communities that you serve utilize? And here, instead of doing this on Zoom, we're going to use slido.com. You can take out your mobile phone and scan the URL code up in the corner, or you can open up a new tab or browser and go to slido.com and enter the code 5305400. And please go ahead and follow the URL or go to the website and answer the question, what are the top 3 native languages of the clients you serve? We can, based on whatever is input by participants here today, we'll have a word cloud. So I'm seeing Pashto, Spanish, Dari, the words that are the languages that are particularly prominent reflect the most commonly entered languages: Ukrainian, Pashto, Dari, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, Russian. This is great. This is really interesting. Anything else? Are folks still entering languages? I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. See Burmese, Swahili, Amharic, Haitian, Hakachin. Okay, so we have a sense of the incredible diversity of the languages of the communities that you serve. Thank you so much for inputting that into the Slido. And I think that will really help inform the next section of our presentation on multilingual resources. And for that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Jill Wheeler, to lead us through the next section of the webinar. Jill?
Thanks so much, Sonia, and thank you to everyone on this call. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all and hope that we can help support the really important work that you do. I'm excited to present some more on the Bureau's multilingual resources and resources for newcomers. And it was fascinating to see the wide range of languages of the people that you serve. So we wanted to begin by highlighting a few of the languages in which we have the most materials currently available at the Bureau. And then we'll talk about other ways to find this information. And throughout and after the presentation, we would really love to hear more from you about which content would be most helpful in which languages. So many of the initial resources that I'll mention are available in about 8 languages. So we have English, Spanish, Chinese, Filipino or Tagalog, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, Russian, Korean, and Arabic. Those are the most frequently available languages for Bureau materials. And I'll mention specifically some other materials, which languages are available along the way. So let's continue on to the next slide. Great. And so in those 8 languages that I initially mentioned, these guides for newcomers managing money are available in those 8 languages. We also have some really helpful glossaries that you might find useful for translating terms, and we're always looking to expand the language availability of materials. So really look forward to hearing your input on the needs. But for the newcomer audience, including refugees, immigrants, and a wide variety of people of English language learners, we have 4 really critical guides to managing money. So we recognize, first of all, that people coming to the US come with a wide variety of experiences in their countries of origin. They might be very familiar with the financial system in their home country or most recent country. They also may have had very little experience with the formal financial system in their home country. So all of the resources that we'll be highlighting today are generally made to be accessible in the most easy to understand wording, using symbols and icons to help represent ideas and help convey this information in different across cultures, to be respectful of other cultures and not to put values on the choices as people make them, but to really recognize we want to provide information to people that's understandable, that you can help share in the wide range of work that you do. So these first initial guides help people to, as they're getting settled, so thinking about ways to open a bank account, what's required, a checklist if people are considering opening a checking or savings account. For example, some of these materials help look at, if you're opening an account, what exactly is the requirement that people would need to have on hand. We recognize that banks and credit unions may be more or less open in some cases to accepting certain types of foreign government IDs, but a basic expectation is banks will typically require a government ID with a picture, either US or state government ID. In some cases, they may accept a foreign government ID. They will typically require a second form of ID, either a bill with an address or a birth certificate, and they'll often require an initial deposit from $25 to $100. So this checklist for opening an account helps you look at, running through what people might need to have on hand. What are some of the questions that they would want to ask when they're choosing a particular bank or credit union or choosing a particular financial institution. I will note that if a bank account pays interest, that means the interest may be subject to taxes. So in those cases, a bank may require a social security number or tax identification number. However, for accounts that do not give interest, There are a wide variety of options available. Banks may offer those accounts to people without a social security number. And so it often depends on the range of accounts available, and the charges are or minimum fees or flexibility often varies quite a bit depending on the community or state or a financial system around you. And we know many of you become very familiar with what are the most trusted options in your community, which banks or institutions provide the most affordable rates or flexibility for the community you serve. A couple of the other really helpful guides for newcomers I want to highlight. One is about ways to receive money. So we know that if a person is starting employment, there are a variety of ways they can be paid. They might be paid in cash. A company might provide direct deposit, or an employer might prefer or offer checks, paper checks, or some employers often now offer payroll cards. So we know there are many different pros and cons to choosing different methods to receive money. So for example, a person who is paid in cash, the advantage is that money becomes immediately available. There are no fees involved in the transaction. At the same time, there are certain risks, such as the risk of being stolen or lost, or having that cash in your pocket, budgeting it out over a certain period of time between paychecks. The guide helps offer a list of questions looking at kind of pros and cons and protections. So for example, choosing whether to be paid by cash, a check, the protections involved in a bank account. The direct deposit might be a safer, more consistent way to receive the money. There are more protections in the case of fraud or scams, but at the same time, it might be harder. There might be more fees to access via an ATM, or the hours might not be convenient for people. So again, just to mention, these checklists help talk through with a person, what are the pros, cons, what are their goals and needs, and what are the questions that may be important for them to ask the provider of the financial services. A couple additional guides that have been popular are also choosing ways to pay your bills. So again, deciding whether a product that has an online bill payment mechanism, or how to request and process a money order to pay a bill. All of those guides can be helpful in these very simple 2 to 3 page formats. And again, these are available in those 8 languages. And finally, the guide on choosing financial products and services really helps run through a checklist of all the possible questions they might want to take into account when considering a US financial product or service. So now as we go on to the next slide, I want to mention those 4 guides were prepared over time to respond to the immediate needs of newcomers understanding their options in the US financial system. Now I want to turn to a set of materials and resources that we call Your Money, Your Goals. And this is a suite of materials that was designed specifically for frontline staff, social service workers, case managers, legal aid attorneys, counselors, people like many of you on this call who are working day to day with people making important decisions that relate to money. And these materials, I really want to emphasize, these are designed for people who are not financial experts themselves. They're designed for people who are trusted resources in their community, and people turn to you for advice. And we want to make these accessible so you have an easy point of reference when a money topic comes up. It's not a curriculum that you need to run through topic by topic. It's really a toolkit so you can easily find the right content and information at the right time. And the materials were really developed to respond to the need that we were hearing from social service workers, from people in helping professions saying, I'm not quite sure where to go to find unbiased, good, trustworthy information. And so all of these resources the content was provided by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a government agency, really developed with a non-judgmental approach to help people understand the options and then make the decision that best fits their needs, their situation, and their values. So the first resource in this set is the toolkit. I'll highlight that in a minute. The second is a set of companion guides for special communities who may have very distinct issues, such as people with disabilities who might be paying for assistive devices such as wheelchairs or hearing aids. Some may be relevant, some are less helpful to this audience. So I'll focus today on the toolkit, and then on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the colorful small booklets that address high priority common financial concerns. So I will jump into the toolkit next, but as you see, all of the resources can be found through the main link on the bottom of the slide, which is consumerfinance.gov/yourmoneyyourgoals. So could we continue on to the next slide, please? The Your Money, Your Goals toolkit, as I mentioned, is designed for practitioners. We often find that in discussing financial information with people that we serve, it's often helpful to speak from our own experiences or our own struggles with financial issues, how we've handled a problem, how we've worked with a family member to help resolve a situation. But this toolkit provides that core information that you can rely on. It includes a lot of tips for how to have that money conversation when it comes up. So this toolkit includes 43 different tools that you can use directly, either yourself or with the people you serve. And it includes some recommendations on tools to use in certain types of situations. So it covers the full range of money topics that often come up. So from the beginning of setting goals or preparing for a large purchase, like an auto, buying a car or getting an auto loan. It includes information on paying bills, budgeting or making decisions when money is tight. It also includes a segment on credit, on debt, and on a variety of specific financial products. So I encourage you to take a look at the toolkit. And I want to mention all of these resources that we're discussing today. All of them are available for free. They can be shipped with no cost, and they're also downloadable through our website. So they're fully available. We'll talk a little about the ordering process, but you can take a look at them online and order paper copies or use the digital version, depending on what works best for you or the people you serve. So let's continue on to the booklets. The overview here shows a picture. These are small, kind of the size of a paperback book, colorful booklets. Developed, all of these tools were developed with rigorous field testing. So practitioners in the field used them with clients and people they serve, gave us a lot of feedback, and it's been a continuous process of adapting and fine-tuning these materials. We find that the colorful booklets use a lot of symbols that will kind of spark conversation, help focus people's attention to have those conversations, but can be really flexible in using depending on the situation. So Behind on Bills deals with some budgeting and planning topics, dealing with paying bills and helping to connect with local resources. Debt covers a range of debts from, choosing when to take on debt, dealing with debt collectors, which may include a variety of debts incurred in migration or process of moving between countries or getting established in the US. Want Credit to Work From You does include some interesting sections on how to build credit, whether or not a person has a social security number or depending on their legal status or refugee status and what documentation they have, there are ways to begin building a credit history. So there's some information in that guide that may be useful. And then Building Your Savings talks about safe places to save money, where to keep it physically protected, protected from fraud, and to build that cushion for the longer term or save for specific items such as a housing down payment, a car loan, and a deposit for an apartment. So let's continue on to the next slide. Just really briefly, so the bills booklet helps people creating action plans, prioritizing bills and expenses. There's a tool there that helps really look at what are the trade-offs. So for example, if a person is feeling a lot of pressure between, paying for utilities, paying for housing costs, paying for a car, and this can be important because in other countries, the system of protections and priorities may be different from what they're experiencing in the US. So it helps to really lay out and help a person prioritize, this is an area that's really urgent for me. This is an area where there may be supports or protections if I'm in a difficult situation. So I encourage you to take a look at those. And the bills booklet is available in both English and Spanish. We hope to eventually expand to other languages, but currently English and Spanish. Let's continue to the next slide. And as I mentioned, Want Credit to work with you will help for anyone interested in reviewing credit reports. We'll talk in just a moment about fraud and understanding what is reported, how to identify fraudulent charges through credit reports and other mechanisms, and how to build and establish credit and how to respond to identity theft. Again, the credit booklet is available in English and Spanish. And now let's go on to highlight a few of the online resources. So we find paper materials work very well for some audiences. Others prefer electronic or digital tools. And most of these tools, all the tools mentioned in the toolkit and booklets can be found on our website. You can download a copy and most of them can be filled out online and they have auto calculating functions. And I do want to mention that we take privacy very seriously. So any of the tools that download information or you're plugging in amounts, we never save that information on our website. And we want to always remind people to follow their local policies about managing private information, being cautious not to save that in unprotected spaces and respect people's privacy. We'll touch on that again when we get to some fraud and scams issues. But some of the online resources I wanted to highlight are some information about auto loans. Know before you owe can help people understand what questions to ask before taking out a loan, understand what sort of down payments are needed, comparing interest rates, loan terms like the length of the loan, the monthly payment amounts. And there's a number of helpful resources you'll find through that link. So let's continue on to the next. And this is just to give a really concrete example of how our tools work. So the benefit and income tracker is an example. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, a little chart showing week by week, tracking what money or resources are coming in to a household. A person could list multiple income sources from one job, a second job, any sort of benefits they're entitled to. In some cases, some benefits are for food or other resources are only available for certain types of expenses that may or may not apply to the people you serve. And then on all of our tools, we include a category for other, recognizing that each family will have their unique needs. And sometimes when people are dealing with so many different priorities, pressures, limited times, we forget different resources that are coming in, or we forget what the timing of those is. So using this tool helps to really just kind of lay it out week by week, plan, look at overlaps with when bills or expenses are coming in and how to look at the timing. So this tool focuses on the income and benefits tracker. There's also an expense tracker and a cash flow tracker that really looks at the tools for when income and bills are coming together, if they're aligned or not. We know often there's a lot of pressure. We know that some people may not be familiar with some of the protections and flexibilities they have around paying bills, whether it's to negotiate the payment date with a provider or a landlord. In some cases, I do want to mention, we see as we work through these tools with people, in some cases, they may realize there's an expense they're paying once a month that could be broken up into paying twice a month, and that may make it easier on their budget. Or they may be able to space out some of the payments. So that can be a helpful tool when budgets are very tight, to look at the timing of payments and help make sure people understand all the options and flexibility they may have. So again, some people prefer to print this out. You can download it and print it. You can download a copy and keep it on your laptop. You can view it on a cell phone or tablet. And it offers, again, plenty of blanks so people can fill this in based on their needs and situation. So let's continue on to the next tool. This covers a topic I mentioned early on in the newcomers guides, but opening a checking or savings account. And again, this is a checklist. It really helps for people to remember, here's what I may need to bring to my appointment or to take to the bank or credit union or other institution when I'm opening an account. And further down in the tool, you'll see a list of questions. So to really help pull out, either ask the bank, or you may want to review the questions yourself, explain to people, help prepare to really understand the different pieces, like what is the minimum amount I need to open an account? What is the monthly fee? What are the different charges, whether there's an additional charge if I want to pay bills through this account, or if I want to use this at an in-network ATM or some other ATM that might be convenient in my community. So let's continue on to the next slide. And this is another example of a tool that can help people to compare the financial service providers. So again, comparing two companies, you can have a person fill it out, compare the pros and cons, or see the advantages or costs of one provider or another, and then help people lay out the options to make the decision that works best given their situation. And throughout all these, I just again want to emphasize the language we use and approach we use tries to recognize the wide variety in situations, in values, and goals, and needs, that these tools try to emphasize there's no right answer, and there should not be judgment. And I'm sure that's something you always keep in mind when you're working with clients. How can we discuss these topics in a way that people do not feel judged? And so we hope some of the language here will be helpful in discussing those topics in a neutral way. And so a handout I just wanted to mention briefly is one handout about sending money abroad. We want to make sure that people understand the protections that they have when they're sending money to other countries. So there are many requirements for the transfer companies. That they must provide information about topics such as the fees and taxes involved, the exchange rate, the total amount that will be paid by the sender, the amount that will be received by the recipient, the date when money will be available to the recipient. And so here, if you find that people are sending remittances and not getting access to this information, or either a company's not providing it, or it's not understandable, if there are concerns, they feel like the company is not following the rules or violating people's rights, then they can submit a complaint. And again, we encourage people to first try to resolve the complaint with the company, but if the complaint is not getting resolved, that's an important time to submit a complaint to the Bureau so we can see what is happening and we can support that consumer in getting a response to their complaint. So let's continue on. And I know this section is really important and we saw a lot of interest in this topic. So I want to jump into the section on fraud, scams, and consumer protection. And I believe we have a poll coming up, discussion question. And I am not sure I'm able to see the chat, but we really want to kick this off by asking all of you, what is the most common scam that you hear about from the people that you serve? So if you want to type that in the chat, I'm not sure that I'll be able to see those responses, but we may come back to this in the Q&A section. And I want to ask my colleagues and organizers, is there a way you want to share a couple examples that are coming in? Or if a couple people want to unmute their lines and we can hear a couple examples.
Hey, Jill, I'm happy to read a couple once I see them.
Thanks both. We are able to unmute folks who have their hand raised. So if they raise their hand, we're happy to unmute their line and they can come on the mic.
So we'll listen for just a moment. If someone wants to describe a scam that you've heard about from people you serve or that you've seen in your community, we want to hear from your experiences. Unfortunately, it is a common topic that we hear a lot of concerns about.
So they're saying that the chat is disabled, but I see some in the question and answers. So we have one saying that they receive mostly that they are approved for a check. So that's a scam. The second one I see is Social Security is calling with a problem and they need to send money right away in the form of a gift card. And then the third one I see is a scam for CalFresh and CalWork, which it's a public benefit in California. And then there's some for calls for medical insurance and the IRS scams.
Okay, thank you, Carmen.
You are welcome.
Really helpful to share some of those firsthand experiences, which align very closely with many concerns we frequently hear about. And so let's continue on with the deck. If we can go on to the next slide, and we'll talk more about some of these scams and how to respond. Could we continue on?
Yes, we've got two folks with hands raised on the mic. We've got Sasha up first on the mic and Adriana, and then happy to continue.
I put mine in the chat. Thanks.
Great. Adriana, have we heard from you? All right, here we go.
And
I
I'm not
don't hear anybody.
hearing a comment.
I don't hear anybody, but the chat is there are so many in the chat, Jill. It is blowing up.
I can see them now.
Can
Wow.
you see them?
There
So
are
we have a
so
lot of
many.
Medicaid,
Right.
post office and FedEx packages. I see filing taxes and applying for benefits, fees, bank account related. There's a new digital currency one I see. So they've been experiencing a lot of different things out here, Jill.
Right. Absolutely. Great. And I would love to hear more about how you're helping people respond or how you're sharing information. And so we'll jump into a little more of that along the way. We'll watch us at the chat as they come in.
And there's another one here, Jill, that talks about ICE, which is kind of interesting. So called by ICE saying that they are on the list to be deported and they'll be removed from it if they pay X amount or if their loved one is detained at the time. And if they want their loved one, they have to pay or least to pay X amount.
Right. Sounds very scary and concerning. And that's a common theme that we see among scammers is that pressure of feeling that a person is in a really high risk situation. And of course, when you hear that kind of concern, you want to take action immediately. You don't want to, it's something you can't, it's not a risk you want to take. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple ways to, and I see a number of IRS related, government related.
And some property management ones out there, Jill.
Right.
It's the newcomer extra so that they take rent a few times from the account and then they call you the bank to return one of the payment. I don't know. It seems like when they're trying to get housing, they're being scammed as well.
Right. So such a wide range. And hopefully this next section will offer a few tips on how to respond and how to head off and prevent future financial harms.
Awesome.
So we see that everyone on this call is in a really important position to help share good information so people can take the follow-up steps when they experience fraud or a scam, and they can help position, inform people so they can prevent fraud or be less susceptible, even though everyone of all backgrounds we see experiencing fraud and scams. So it is certainly many examples unique to this newcomer community, but common processes and common experiences across all communities. And so we want to talk a little about how some tools for preventing and responding to financial harm, from spotting those red flags to what to do when you or someone you serve has experienced fraud or a scam. So let's continue on. I want to highlight a webpage that we hope will be very helpful to you all. It's consumerfinance.gov/fraud. And this summarizes some of the many scams like those that you have mentioned. We see, again, just stepping back a little bit to say, what do we mean when we talk about fraud or scams? And in a very general sense, we're talking about actions that cause someone to lose money or assets or property, or it's sometimes caused by someone we know or someone unknown to us. But in some way, people might be tricked into revealing information to scammers or others, or information might be stolen so others can use that for some financial gain. And we know that scams are constantly changing. But there's been, over time, as technology has changed, there are many different ways that people can try to get access to a person's identity or financial information in order to steal those assets. And as always, we want to avoid shame or blaming the person who has experienced this. We know this is happening in so many areas, and scammers are really creative and innovative and effective. I mean, they're creative, so it's very tempting and very easy to respond when you're in a high pressure situation, or the threats seem really intimidating. It's easy to release some information that will have many long-term consequences and can be really damaging to people. So we know certainly in this context, in particular, the newcomer and refugees communities are learning so many things about the US system all at once. We work with many people who are fearful and don't know who to trust. They're in a situation where so many things and people and organizations are new. So of course, it's difficult to understand who to trust or who to turn to. And so we are so appreciative of you being here, because we know you are trusted sources of information and advice in the community and with the people that you serve. So we want to help make sure that we know what personal information is so important to protect and what scams to be aware of to help try to avoid some of these in the future. So let's continue on. This slide gives a really quick overview of so many of those examples, like the ones that you mentioned. We saw a number of those related to imposter scams, pretending to be someone from the IRS or ICE or a housing related situation. We saw others related to, we saw some related to crypto assets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Area seems to be particularly active and concerning and can be really challenging for people to deal with. Some of the general scams we typically see range from charity scams, so fundraising for really good causes or causes that sound really good. During COVID, there are a number of kind of COVID charity related scams, asking people to give money or share, and in that process exposing their financial information. We see debt collectors or people, posing as debt collectors. People may or may not owe those debts, but maybe it's a rent related payment or housing related payment. And it's so important in those cases to make sure, verify that some sort of payment or debt is owed, to go to that direct office or company or person directly and not just respond to a phone call or a text if you're not quite sure where it's coming from. One really common and concerning scam that I want to mention here, it's listed as grandparent scams. It can be more of a family emergency or relative or person in distress scam. That's a particular concern that we've seen broadly in the newcomer and immigrant community, where and sometimes it's around threatening, someone is crossing the border and they're being someone claims that a relative crossing the border is in a position where they need money wired quickly, or something terrible will happen. They might contact a person asking for, a small money transfer, a larger money transfer, but that person in distress sort of concern is a really common concern to keep an eye out for. And in terms of responding to some of those situations, it's really important to help a person think about where they can turn to verify information or help, if there's a situation, report to authorities, assess where is this information coming from, how are they being contacted. But we recognize it can be very scary and intimidating. And we'll talk a little more about where to report these in just a moment. We've seen a number of lottery or prize related scams, which I'll mention in a moment, just stealing information in mail fraud, or stealing mail, or stealing documents. So in terms of prevention, that's an important reminder to you. Anytime dealing with a person's identification numbers, passport numbers, different immigration related identification numbers, always keeping those highly secured, only giving them out when it's absolutely necessary. And I think that's something that's very hard to know. When a child is registering for school, you need a certain amount of information. When they're registering for a activity, you may or may not really need to give out as much information as they may be requesting. But just one important note is, in protecting people's information, the more that we can remind people, these numbers are so important, only give them out if it's a very trusted resource or person or organization. And one general rule of thumb is, in any of these cases, if someone is reaching out and contacting a person, it's better to hang up and call back. So even the person, the people you're serving, think about ways to make sure that you're encouraging them to think about where calls or texts are coming from. So if there's doubt, they can go back to your organization's main website, or go to the city agency website through the secure, website address, or by choosing to dial into a known credible phone number rather than just answering a number where someone is reaching out. Finally, I did want to mention romance scams, and again, similar examples of people establishing relationships with a person they might care about. Maybe they've never met in person, but they've been building a relationship online. And then the scammer might say, well, I want to come visit you, or I have a health situation. Could you help transfer a little bit of money, or buy some crypto, or, I'll help you invest in crypto, and are examples that we see. And then they can use that information either to, drain their account further financially, or just take the money and assets. And so again, just keeping in mind, any request for information, whether it's, potentially an imposter agency, romance related scams, or other, family emergency scams to keep a strong eye out for. And then I do want to mention one little call out box that's on some of our newcomer guides. And I think it's a really challenging and delicate topic, but another category that's been recognized by the Bureau is, and I have seen in my personal experience working with immigrant communities, is affinity fraud, where all of us naturally feel more comfortable with people who may speak our language, who have some common background, but all, keeping in mind their fraud can happen in a wide variety of settings and a wide range of people. So keep in mind people who you may meet more recently. You may know trusted service providers in a community, for example, promising legal services or tax advice services. Some may be known in the community for a long term. Others might be newer arrivals that you might want to test out and trust, but be aware of fraud that can come within the community as well. And I want to continue on to, and you'll see a bit more on that in some of the newcomers guides. And I want to highlight just a couple additional scams. If we could continue to the next slide around government imposter scams. We've talked about this, saying it's a call from the IRS. Some scammers are really sophisticated in spoofing email addresses, websites, fake badge numbers, and again, can be threatening people with arrest or deportation. Always reach out and verify, go to the IRS website or to the state or city government website to make sure it's a legitimate request. And let's continue to the next slide, just to highlight a couple others that were mentioned, or we've touched on lottery and sweepstakes scams, saying you won a prize, we just need your account information to transfer the money, or if for this little payment up front, we'll be able to, for taxes, we'll be able to send the full amount of the prize. That's another common lottery or sweepstakes scam. And again, check with someone trusted, contact through another, a main website to see if it's a credible source. Finally, a few quick tips for avoiding lottery scams. Keep in mind, we usually cannot win a contest unless we've entered. Pay to play is not common, so keep a close eye out if there is that upfront payment. And in any situations to wire funds, be very cautious about who you're wiring to and what the background is. And pay attention to warnings from a financial institution. You may set up alerts on a bank account or a credit card that can help flag unusual transactions. Let's continue on to a really important step. And I want to make sure my colleague Lisa Schifferly is an expert in this area as well, and will be available to answer more detailed questions on fraud and scams. But one really important key message I want to leave with everyone as I get close to wrapping up is if a person has experienced a scam, you can report it to authorities. One main resource is the Federal Trade Commission. And let's include the link in the chat. So reportfraud.ftc.gov. Another important site is identitytheft.gov if a person's identity has been compromised. And you can also, of course, contact local police or sheriff's office, or report to your state attorney general is a really important resource. We recognize there can be a lot of fear around reporting to authorities. So again, we recognize some providers, each agency, we know many agencies have their own policies about what information to report, about sharing of information. So keep in mind that agencies may share information, but we can talk a little later about the best ways to report in different situations. But the Federal Trade Commission is the main agency that handles fraud. And so that you can check online, you can check off the category of fraud or scams. It's a pretty easy process. So they can begin an investigation and may not resolve your specific concern, but could do follow-up in continued investigations. So let's continue on to protecting your identity. I've talked a little bit about this already. There is a handout, just a checklist to remember to practice online security, use secure systems when sharing or sending personal identification numbers or sensitive information. Use a shredder. Some of these are very standard, but use a shredder, destroy any papers with important personal identifying information on them. Only give out ID numbers when it's absolutely necessary. Use secure passwords online. Don't use public Wi-Fi when sending personal information is one recommendation. And then for some people who they might find their address in more advertising marketing materials, you can opt out of, there's some opt-out websites for opting out of credit card offers, opting out of phone calls. So a variety of ways. We encourage you to take a look at that handout. And then identity theft. There are a variety of ways to handle identity theft. So it is important to report to authorities. There are a variety of avenues that I mentioned, identitytheft.gov, the FTC. If a person has a credit card or is dealing with a financial provider, it's important to report to that financial provider. For people with a social security number or credit cards, there are many ways to put a freeze on the account so no additional transactions can occur. And I won't jump into them right now, but happy to come back to that in the Q&A section. Let's continue on to the next slide about spotting red flags. And I think this is helpful to keep in mind just in the process of both making large financial transactions, whether it's buying a car, putting down a deposit on an apartment, any large purchases, or some of the scams that we saw mentioned in the chat, the pressured tactics are a red flag to look out for. So if something is extremely urgent, a person has to make an immediate decision, there are really not that many cases in which that may happen. And especially with a government agency, there should be a little time to take time to verify, make sure this is the right person, the right information, or the right decision. So watch out for pressured sales tactics or pressure from scammers, time and urgency, inconsistency in information. Maybe they've said one thing, but then the story changes. The same with a large purchase, or they won't put information in writing can be another red flag. So there's a handout that may be helpful for you to take a look at. You can easily download online. So now I want to wrap up and move quickly to a conclusion so we can jump into questions. But first, a really helpful resource in Spanish and English on our website is Ask CFPB, which you can plug in a quick question like how to buy a car or how about an auto loan. And there's some great answers and it'll help link you to a wide range of bureau resources. You can browse by topic or plug in a question there at consumerfinance.gov/ask-CFPB. And then the next slide gives a little information about ordering printed materials. As I mentioned, all of these materials are free. You can order them online through consumerfinance.gov/order. So you can see many of the materials I mentioned and many others as well, including some available in other languages, particularly in Spanish. We can answer any detailed ordering questions in the chat. I will acknowledge our page is not the most user-friendly for ordering, so don't hesitate to reach out to the email we'll share in a moment in the next slide. And let's go on to just highlight a couple ways to stay connected with us. One is subscribing to the multilingual communities listserv. And we can include that in the chat. It's consumerfinance.gov/language. It's a great resource page, and you'll see a subscription box on the lower right. And then for the materials that I mentioned in the Your Money, Your Goals resource suite, you can either do a quick QR scan of the code on the slideshow, or we can plug the link in the chat and you can join our email list. That will give opportunities for training on the full range of different tools and materials. We have a webinar series starting in January that will do a detailed walk through the toolkit for 1 hour a week on Thursdays in January. So I'm happy to share that in the chat in a moment. And I think we are just about ready to move on to questions. I'll highlight our email. One additional email for our team is yourmoneyyourgoals@cfpb.gov. And with that, I would like to open it back up to questions and turn it over to my colleagues.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. So as Jill mentioned, it's now time for our Q&A session. We've been receiving a lot of great questions throughout this webinar. And I'm going to give Carmen a few minutes to sort of look through the questions that you've answered already that you think might be of interest to the whole group. Also give you all some time. If you had a question, you haven't entered it yet, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. But while you all do that, I'm going to first ask you all some questions that we got during the registration. So the very first question that we'd love to pose to you all are, what are some of the best ways to connect clients to resources on finances that are really appropriate for clients that have low digital literacy levels? And I'll open that to anyone who wants to answer.
So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So what are some of the best ways to connect clients to resources on finances that would be appropriate for a client that does not have a high digital literacy level?
Yeah, so I'll definitely try to take that, and one of my other colleagues can jump in. Most of our resources, we try and aim to do those and write them at a 5th grade reading level. So sending them to our website, it should be as pretty much plain language. We definitely like to hear feedback from you all. So if you find that it's not, please let us know. But again, we try to make sure that all of our literacy is at a 5th or 6th grade reading level. And I don't know if any of my other colleagues want to answer that.
I can just add also for older adults in the audience or people who serve older adults, we have our Money Smart for Older Adults campaign, which is jointly done with the FDIC. And that is not only plain language, but it's also available in large print, and it's available in English and in Spanish. It has an instructor guide, a resource guide, and PowerPoints. And it's designed to teach people how to recognize and avoid a lot of the scams that Jill talked about today.
Thank you, Lisa. And Jill, I saw that your camera came on. Did you have something?
Oh, nothing to add at this point. Thanks, Carmen.
Okay, great. So I did see a couple of questions in the chat that I kind of thought that might be interesting to others. Is one person said, I have a client that experiences loss through World Remit. Any experience with this wire transfer business? And so Sonia responded and told them that they can search the CFPB consumer complaint database to see other complaints we've received regarding World Remit Corp. And there's a search function there that you can do. And so I'm going to copy this link and throw it in the chat here for anybody else that might want this link for our consumer database. And then Sonia just ran the search, and it looked like there was about 80 matches in our complaint database for that. Another question, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add to that. Relatedly, this is not about World Remit, but about wire transfers. and the use of them in frauds. People may have heard about the Western Union case that a bunch of federal government agencies brought against Western Union because they were allowing people to transmit money to scammers when they knew that was going on and didn't do anything to stop it. And so as a result of that, people who did give money to scammers during a certain time frame were eligible for money back from Western Union. So it is just a good thing to keep in mind in terms of avoiding scams, is to think about how people are asking you to pay, because if they're asking to pay by wire transfer or gift card or cryptocurrency, those are big red flags, because they know that it's easy for them to get the money and very hard for you to ever get your money back once you discover it's a scam.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And then there was another question about the complaints. So where to file a complaint. So I just put it in the chat, and I'm sure it's up there again. So this might be a second iteration of that. And then another question about complaints was, do complaints potentially become sources for your evidence in a case? And the short answer is complaints can give us insights into the problems people are experiencing in the marketplace, and that helps us regulate consumer financial products and services under existing federal consumer financial laws. And it also helps us enforce the laws judiciously and educate and empower consumers to make informed financial decisions. So I am going to copy the complaint database website and put it here, the link. And you can go on that and see our database for complaints and what we have to date.
And also to add to what Carmen was saying, a lot of the CFPB complaints are fed into the FTC's Consumer Sentinel system, and that is accessible by law enforcement across the country, FBI, DOJ, state attorney generals. So they do look at those complaints in terms of law enforcement actions. If they know that they have a case against, say, Western Union, then they'll look for all the consumers that filed complaints against Western Union to try to support their case. So it goes, not only does CFPB look at it, but a lot of the complaints are given to Sentinel, which is a secure law enforcement database that other law enforcement can access for enforcement purposes.
Diane put in the chat that my links aren't showing up, and I've been putting them in, so I don't know, maybe somebody on the switchboard can look into that. But thank you, Diane. Another question was real quick about whether we provide our resources in Chinese simplified or traditional. So typically it's traditional. There are some cases where we offer both simplified and traditional. We did that a lot during the pandemic, and those resources you'll probably find in simplified and traditional, but as I said, typically we just offer those in Chinese traditional for now. And some people asked about the tools. We put those in the chat. Someone else asked about if we would include resources in Swahili. And of course, we're always looking for ways to expand our offerings. And there are a number of ways that we determine who and what we're offering. And at this time, we just only have the 8, but hopefully we'll be expanding those offerings. But right now we just have the 8, which are Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Arabic, Russian, Haitian Creole, and English. And I'm just looking through the chat. I see a couple of open questions. Are these resources for clients who have been involved in fraud unintentionally? For example, scammers using their bank accounts or information to defraud others. Are there resources for clients? So I'm gonna let Jill and Lisa respond to that one.
I'll start and then Jill can add in. I think a lot of the resources resources we already mentioned are relevant for that type of scam or fraud as well. The Money Smart for Older Adults curriculum, Your Money, Your Goals, any of the scam prevention materials, and reportfraud.ftc.gov and identitytheft.gov if identity theft is involved are all relevant to that type of situation as well.
And Jill? Do you have
think
anything to add?
Lisa, I think Lisa covered it. I think those,
Yeah.
we hope those will be helpful to all.
So we have from Bonnie, she says she had a client who was purchasing a new car in 2022. He had an established credit history. The car dealer tried to charge him a 30% interest rate for the car, promising him after 1 year of payments, he would guarantee a credit score of 650. Bonnie's question is there a maximum for interest rate that car dealers are legally not allowed to go above?
That's often a question of state law, so you'll need to consult with your state attorney general, but many states do have an interest rate above which it's considered to be abusive. And I did, as a legal services attorney before coming to the government, see, unfortunately, a lot of people who did enter into contracts like that with exorbitant interest rates, and then they end up in a position where the car has to be repossessed and they still owe a ton of money because of the exorbitant interest rate. So there are laws against it, but you'll need to check with the state law and state attorney general's office to see what the laws are relevant to you.
And I would add there have been cases of a series of complaints coming in certain areas or from certain communities that have helped the Bureau identify patterns of a discrimination towards certain populations around car loans. So if you feel like there's something that's not right, and or they, check into the state laws, and you can, if the person thinks there's a violation, they may want to submit that complaint as well.
And then one thing that I wanted to add, and I'm going to put that in the chat, is that we do have our 800 line where people can call and submit a complaint, and we offer over 180 languages. So if someone has a complaint that they want to lodge in, like the question, the languages that you all have been speaking in reference to, like Swahili and Dari and Pashto, please call that 855-411-2372 number. And we have interpreters that will be live and help them get that taken care of.
Yeah, I see another question that came in about where you can report fraud which has taken place abroad. For example, if the money were sent to a scammer residing abroad, you can still report that to reportfraud.ftc.gov, and Department of Justice and other federal law enforcement have ways to deal with overseas scammers. And in fact, there was a big case recently where they shut down a bunch of call centers that were doing the IRS imposter scam. It resulted in a huge decrease in the number of IRS imposter calls. So go ahead and report to reportfraud.ftc.gov, even if the scammer resides abroad. It can be harder to bring a case, but it's still possible.
And there's another question, and this might be for one of the other people in the group. It says, what direction or advice do you have for how to educate older multilingual immigrants and their caregivers about finances?
I'll be happy to take that question since I work in the Office for Older Americans.
Right.
And we do, in addition to the Money Smart for Older Adults curriculum, we also have a series called Managing Someone Else's Money, which is designed specifically for financial caregivers. And it's designed for just regular people who are taking on the role, not professionals. So if you're serving as power of attorney for someone or as guardian or conservator, there are guides to walk you through what your role is. So you can find those at consumerfinance.gov/MSEM, like managing someone else's money. And we also have a new guide called Considering a Financial Caregiver, Know Your Options, which walks people through what their options are if you're earlier in the process and you don't know, do I need a power of attorney, or maybe I just need to set up what's called a trusted contact or a convenience account. It goes over both informal and formal financial caregiving options. So again, that's available at consumerfinance.gov/MSEM.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat or the Q&A. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Carmen, one question that we got from registration was, how can service providers spot and address the scams and the quick money schemes that their clients are getting through WhatsApp and other social media platforms?
I'm going to defer this to Jill and Lisa.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'll start with the disclaimer that anything I say is my opinion and not necessarily the opinion of the CFPB. But there certainly, in my opinion, is more that social media companies and payment providers, app providers could be doing to spot and flag these types of fraud and scams. As a service provider, to spot them for the people you serve, it seems pretty hard unless they come tell you about it or one of their friends or family member tell you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jill, you're going to say that Lisa has covered it.
Well, and I was just, the more reminders, whether it's, posters or handouts about spotting red flags, or, just keeping people aware of it, that it's constantly happening. I know in the government and in our agency, we receive training every so often. And each time it's a good reminder for us about clicking on emails or attachment. And for anyone, we just have to hear it over and over again for us to remember and think about it each time. It's really tough.
And I just wanted to address something that was in the chat earlier, that the word red flag can be a cultural idiom. And yes, we are aware of that. And that's why when we are translating our materials, we are careful that our auditors and our translators are making sure that they're not translating idioms word for word, because we definitely do not want that. So we are trying to make it so that when you read, if the English version says red flag, definitely we are not using red flag in the Spanish or the Chinese, because they don't translate well. But thank you for that. I got the question before from clients, and recently, if they owe money and can't pay, would they end up arrested or being put in jail? That is the sad question that gets asked for centuries. In my former life, when I was in the mortgage field, they would ask me that too. And my response to them was always, there is no debtor's jail. And it's sad that they think that they can be arrested, but the only way we can do it is like just continue to encourage them that, if they sincerely can't pay it, they're not going to go to jail, but to try to manage their finances in a way that, perhaps they don't get there, but if something happens and that they're there, to do their best to pay what they can until they can pay it. But there's no debtor's jail.
And I can mention a couple resources and checklists around knowing what to do when a debt collector calls, and understanding, what is considered harassment or not, what's acceptable, how often can people be contacted. So in case that's helpful in related situations, people do have some rights about dealing with debt collectors.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay, everyone. So I think we only have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
So, Carmen, unless you saw any other burning questions.
I don't see any other burning questions, and I think I've been scouring this chat. And if I skipped you, I apologize, but I think we've covered everybody's question. I see one new message. Oh, I see thank yous. See, I think we're good.
Okay, just wanted to check. And just
Yeah,
to
I see
remind-
thank yous.
If we didn't get to a question, of course, you all can email CFPB one of your questions. You can email Switchboard and we will connect with your presenters today. I just want to have a quick refresher of the learning objectives from today's training. They're on your screen right now. We hope that you were able to achieve these learning objectives today, and we have put together a list of recommended resources. The full list of the resources used for this webinar will be shared with you in the follow-up email. Before signing off, I hope that you'll take a very short moment to capture our feedback survey. This survey does take less than 1 minute, and it's very helpful for us in improving our trainings going forward. Depending on how you join this webinar today, the survey itself might already be open in your web browser, and Rosalie is actually going to drop the survey link in the chat, so you can just click on that link and access it. And then finally, here is Switchboard's contact information. I'll wait 1 more second for you all to use the QR code. Okay. And then finally, here is Switchboard's contact information. I do hope you'll stay in touch with us and join our future trainings. Thank you so much for joining today, and a huge thanks to our speakers, Sonia Lynn, Jill Wheeler, Carmen Cruz, and Lisa Schipperly. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.